I've been investing in real estate for 22 years. I currently own 103 rental units, and that rental income now covers 100% of my family's living expenses without needing a 9-to-5. I've also helped thousands of other investors do the same. So in this video, I'm going to condense 2 decades of wins, mistakes, and hard lessons into one focused session so that you can stop grinding and let your properties pay the bills. Number 1, cash flow is what you want. Wealth building is how you get there. Now, I talk to a lot of real estate investors, and almost all of them have a cash flow goal. Maybe it's $10,000 per month or $120,000 per year, or maybe it's bigger at $240,000 per year. But either way, they want to use that cash flow to buy back their time, to give them more options, to basically have financial freedom. And it makes a lot of sense. You need cash flow coming in order to pay the bills, in order to replace the active income or the job salary that you have. But the problem is, and I've done this myself, and I've seen a lot of other investors do this, is they think just because the end result, the goal is cash flow, that the only way to get there is by stacking up as much cash flow as possible. And those are 2 separate things. Let me explain by showing you a common approach called cash flow stacking that a lot of real estate investors use to try to figure out how they're going to accomplish their real estate goal. They might say, hey, I think I'm going to get $100 per month minimum on my rental properties that I buy. And if I want to make $10,000 per month, I just need to do the math. To make $10,000 per month at $100 per door or per unit, I need to have 100 units in order to meet my goal. So I'm at 5 units now. I need to get another 95 units. Or maybe you adjust your goal and you say, well, $100 a month is not enough. So I'm going to make a minimum of $200 per month per unit. So in order to do that, the math just means I need to have 50 units in order to make $10,000 per month. Now, there's a couple problems with this approach. Number 1 is most real estate investors use bad math. They leave out a lot of the expenses like capital expenses and maintenance and vacancy and paying property managers. And so the $100 a month or $200 a month they think they're making is actually a negative number or zero, and they're not making the cash flow they thought. So they're not actually accomplishing their goals, and they still have a bunch of properties. But the other problem is that this is a go big, a riskier plan or approach to achieve financial freedom. In order to achieve your goal, you got to get a lot of units. 100 units means you have 100 heating and air units, you have 100 tenants, you have 100 mortgage payments to make. So you are having to juggle a lot of different things in order to make your business plan successful. And it's not easy to do. No matter what you hear on YouTube, growing and scaling and 10xing and doing all that has a lot of risk, and a lot of things can go wrong. Another problem here is that you tend to chase cash flow. So in order to make that $200 in cash flow today, you might start chasing properties that are in the lower price range of your market, that need more repairs, that are older properties, or you might just go to a whole nother market altogether and not invest in your local market because it's too high of a price and there's no, quote, cash flow properties where you live. And so you go in another market that might not have as much of a growth potential, and you just own these cash flow properties. Well, the problem is you're missing out on a whole big chunk of the real estate market that might actually achieve your goals just as well as just chasing cash flow. So if I don't like cash flow stacking, what do I like instead in order to help us with the big picture goal setting of our real estate investing business? I like to use a wealth goal or a net worth goal and then work it backwards to figure out how many properties I might need. Let me explain how I do that using a rule of thumb called the 6% rule, which is just a variation of something called the 4% rule that a lot of stock and bond investors have used over the years to figure out how much money they needed to have to retire off stocks and bonds. And it works just as a very simple formula. Let's say that you had that goal of $120,000 per year. That's always the starting point. How much cash flow do you want to have whenever you achieve your goal? And the big question here is, how much wealth do I need to have? How much equity do I need to have in real estate in order to generate that $120,000 per year? That's the open question. And so using the 6% rule, you would just divide your goal, $120,000 per year, by 6%, and it would tell you that you need to have $2 million in wealth in order to achieve your goal. Now, what does that mean? How's that relevant to you as a real estate investor? It just means that I'm confident, and this is my personal approach, that if I invest $2 million, that I can get about a 6% return on that $2 million, that I can get a cash return from those investments that I can use to pay my bills, to travel, to do whatever I want to do. Now, maybe 6% is a little too aggressive. Maybe you would rather use something more conservative like 5%, which just means you'd have to have more wealth, probably $2.4 million. Or maybe you're saying, hey, I could get a lot better than that. I can get 10%. In that case, you'd have to have $1.2 million. But I do recommend being pretty conservative with this, because if you think you can get 10%, you got to do that over your entire portfolio, a lot of wealth, and it's not as always as easy to do as you grow. But the main point of this, and the takeaway here, is that instead of having 50 or 100 units in order to achieve your goals, it actually might be a lot less than you think. So just for an example, if your goal is $2 million in the end, one way to do that would be to have 10 properties that each are worth $200,000. So these might be, little single family houses or something, or maybe they're condo or townhome units. And each of those properties worth $200,000. Let's say in the end that you paid off those properties. You paid off all the debt, which I know is sacrilegious in real estate investing, but stick with me here. This is just a simple approach to the goal. If you had 10 properties worth $200,000 each, that would be $2 million. And if those properties generated $120,000 per year, then you would meet your goal with 10 properties instead of 50 or 100 properties. Is that a little bit easier to manage? Is that a little bit easier to figure out, to manage your tenants, to pay your bills, and to do everything else? Of course it is. This is why I've always been a big fan of the small and mighty approach to real estate investing, because it's something easier to get your head around. And what this looks like in reality is that maybe you don't have 10 properties along the way. Maybe you buy 20 properties and then you sell 10 of them at some point, and then you keep the other 10. And by selling those 10 properties, you use the money from those properties to pay off the debt on the other ones. Or maybe you say, I don't want to have all my properties free and clear. I don't want to have 50 properties, but instead I'm just going to have 20 properties, and I'm going to pay off 5 of them, pay off the debt on 5 of them, and I'm going to keep debt on 15 of them. But because I have lower amounts of debt and I have a more stable portfolio, it still generates the cash flow I want. There's a lot of variations that you can do here, depending on your risk tolerance, depending on how much money you want, depending on the price range of the properties. But the point I want to make here is the goal, or the compass, what you're trying to move towards as a real estate investor, is the wealth goal. If you can measure your success by how much closer you're getting to that wealth goal, it'll be a much better predictor of your progress. And it'll also give you more flexibility to buy different types of investments within the real estate investing world, high price properties, lower price properties, and even investments outside of real estate, like stocks and businesses and other things. You can build wealth with those and then reinvest that money into real estate. They all work, but the wealth goal is the most important metric that you're working backwards from. The second lesson from my 22 years as a real estate investor is to find your focus. I think the biggest obstacle we face as real estate investors is distraction. We have so many opportunities. We have so many great ideas, and they're all good ideas. They all could work. We watch YouTube and we see all these different strategies, but finding your focus means finding like that sweet spot where you find the right strategy for yourself at the right time of your journey. And I want to give you a couple frames that'll help you find your focus. The first one is to figure out what phase of your real estate investing journey you're in. Based on whether you're a starter, number 1, a wealth builder, number 2, or a harvester, number 3, those are the different phases of your journey, will actually push you towards different strategies, towards different approaches to risk and debt, towards different ways to invest your down payments, even the types of financing you use. All those tactics of real estate investing really depend on which one of these you're in. And let me just briefly explain what these are. I do a lot of videos on this on my channel. The goal of a starter is just to do your first deal or two. That's it. It's not to build the most wealth possible. It's not to hit a home run, to use a baseball metaphor. It's just to hit a base hit, just to get on base. That's what you're trying to do as a starter. Because the goal of a starter, you really just want to build up your knowledge. And you want to do it safely. Because if you, on your first deal or two, if you do something crazy and aggressive and you lose money and you're out of the game, then you've just ruined the entire journey from the very beginning. So take some baby steps, be careful. You want to walk before you run, to use another cliche. That's all the goal of a starter. And just do that first deal or two, whatever strategy helps you get in the game. I've got some more ideas that I'll share with you in a little bit. The builder phase, though, is once you've got a little bit of momentum, you've got that knowledge, you've built some relationships. It's all about return on investment and, of course, doing it safely. But you want to invest whatever capital you have, which is typically pretty limited, and you want to grow that as much as possible. That's why leverage is such a big deal. If you can do it safely, if you can use mortgages and other people's money in real estate investing, it is a fantastic way to grow from a small amount of money to actually get to the goal that we talked about in the last idea. $2 million might seem like a huge amount of money, but if you're safely investing your money using leverage, you do it over a 5, 10, 15-year period, it's very possible to close that gap. And that's what the builder phase is all about. But then you get to the third phase, which I think most real estate investors don't hear enough about, which is the harvester phase. And I got these ideas, by the way, from Pete Fortunato down in Tampa, Florida, who's an investor. And he uses a term called the ender in the third phase. I like the term harvester better because in the third phase, you're sort of changing your priorities. It's almost like you're playing a different game, a different sport with different rules. And instead of maximizing growth and trying to always get the highest return on investment, you're actually trying to get the highest return on your life, on your time. You're trying to cash in your chips. And so you want to reduce your risk. You don't want to take quite as much risk at that stage. You want to be, if you were playing football, you'd be running the ball more and have a little bit more conservative on offense. You also want to increase your cash flow. So we talked about cash flow in the last one. You don't always want to maximize cash flow in the builder phase. Maybe you do in some cases, but when you get to the harvester phase, you actually want to have the cash flow to live off of. So you might start cashing in some of your equity, trading it for other things, or selling properties to get more cash flow. So that's really important in that phase. And then also you want to maximize your time. You want to reduce the amount of hassle you spend. So you don't want to have to do everything in your whole business. You want to make it semi-passive or passive so you can actually live off your rental income. So that's just an abbreviated version of the phases. But by knowing what phase you're in, this is a huge idea that'll help you find your focus. The second idea that'll help you find your focus is what kind of time commitment can you make to real estate investing? I can't underestimate how big this is. I see so many people, they see the shiny objects of these strategies and they think, oh, that's the one I should do because the burst strategy is great or because it worked for somebody else. But here you got to have some self-reflection and say, and I like to divide it into how much time you have per week to invest in real estate. So let's say you had 5 to 10 hours per week, or actually let's start with 0 hours per week, 0 to 2 hours. If you're super, super busy and you can't even find 5 hours per week during lunch breaks or on the weekend to try to invest in real estate a little bit, real estate is probably not for you. It's not this is something you have to start a business with. And so if that's you, invest in something more passive. Go to index funds, put your money in the bank, whatever you're going to do. This is a different conversation for a different video. But if you have 5 to 10 hours per week minimum, you can fit in this category that I consider like a semi-passive investor. So you're going to have to rely on other people to do a lot, but you're still going to have to do the thinking, the allocating of the money. And so what kind of strategies work there? House hacking is a great one. If you're a new investor, you can live in the property that you're going to invest in. You could rent out extra bedrooms. You could rent out extra units. You could have an ADU that as an accessory dwelling unit, like an extra property that you rent out on your property. You could also just rent out the house that you're living in now and then buy another one. So lots of simple strategies you could do. I also recommend focusing on turnkey properties, meaning not fixer-uppers. Properties that are either like new construction, or have very, very light cosmetic rehab. None of the big fixer-upper type stuff. I call these boring rentals because you might just need to put a big down payment. Instead of you trying to do the fancy refinance and get all your money back, you might just put 20, 30, 40% down in order to make these boring rentals work, and then you just hold on to them. You could also consider lending in the semi-passive phase. I put a star next to it because it takes a little bit more expertise to lend your money. I would rather start renting first, but lending could be a very semi-passive way to invest in real estate. So those are the people who have 5 to 10 hours per week. If you have 10 to 20 hours per week, that's more of a semi-active investment. So you can actually have like a side hustle basically of being in real estate. This is where fixer-upper properties and trying to find off-market real estate deals can make sense. This is also where you can get more involved in the management for extra cash flow. Like Airbnb, short-term rentals has been a really big trend. I have a lot of people I know who do that successfully. You could even get into these little niche strategies like rent by the room, where you actually have people who rent 4 or 5 bedrooms in a house, and you then make more cash flow because of that as well. There's lots of these little strategies that work if you have the time to basically build a business around that. So those are semi-active strategies. And then if you have 21 hours or more per week, this is what I was when I first started. You could do all the other ones, but you could also get into flipping houses, wholesaling, finding good deals that you can generate extra cash flow by buying them low and then selling them high. All these depend on you finding your focus based on how much time you have to invest in it and based on your phase. And so if you figure those two things out, I think you'll find a lot more clarity so that you can take the next steps with more confidence. Lesson number 3 is to define what it means to have a good real estate deal. Everyone in real estate talks about, I want a good deal. I want a good deal. But do you really understand what it means to have a good deal? This is a topic I talked about in several chapters in my book, The Small and Mighty Real Estate Investor. In fact, I talk about most of these ideas in this video in that book if you want to check that out. But in the chapter on deal analysis, I pointed out there's really only 2 ways to make money in real estate investing. You either make money from the rental income, from the cash flow, or you make money from the growth of the property. And let me explain what I mean with a really simple example of analyzing a property. Let's say you found a house that you could buy for $240,000 in an area you wanted to invest in. And this property rented for $1,800 per month, $1,800. And you had expenses like taxes and insurance, management, maintenance, all of those expenses to operate the property, everything except for your mortgage payment. Let's leave that out because we're just going to assume in this case that you have enough cash to pay $240,000 cash. So stick with me here. So after you subtract your $800 in expenses from your $1,800 in rent, you have $1,000 left over every month. That's called your net operating income, one of the most important numbers in real estate investing. And if you figure that out on a yearly basis, so $1,000 per month times 12 is $12,000 per year. So let's take that number. And remember, you only make money in two ways in real estate investing. You make money with cash flow and growth. So this is the cash flow piece of it. After all of our expenses, we have $12,000 per year left over. And I want to know, how much cash flow do I make? So you use a formula that's sometimes known as a cap rate. I call it an unleveraged yield, where I want to figure out what's the return on my investment just from the cash flow. And so in this case, that's $12,000 per year divided by my total purchase price, which was $240,000. And when you do that calculation, you come up with a number of 5%. So let's set that number aside. 5% is the return on our investment that we're making just from the cash flow. But let's say this property is in a decent location where the population is growing, where more people want to live, and it actually grows at 4 or 5% per year. Like the price of the property and the rent of the property over the long run grow at 4 or 5% per year. That is about the average. Last time I looked at the appreciation rate of real estate in the United States was about 4%, maybe a little bit less than that. Depends on what part of the country you're in. So for this example, let's say we make 5% from the cash flow, 4% from the growth, which would mean we make about a 9% total return from those two sources. Now, this is about as simple as analysis as it can get, but this is actually the analysis I run on every single property that I look at. I've been looking at properties this week here in 2025, and I run this exact analysis. I try to simplify it without having debt on the property to see what will this property return before I put debt on the property, before I complicate things. And if it doesn't meet a certain goal that I have for the cash flow, the unleveraged yield, if it doesn't meet a certain projection or like a possibility that this property could grow at a higher rate, then I wouldn't do the deal. Like I want to see a total return, in my case, typically for 9 or 10% if I'm investing very low risk with no debt. So that's a place to start. That's one way to define a good deal. You got to pick out whatever metrics you want for your unleveraged yield. What would that have to be for you? That's a personal decision, but I just gave you an example of what mine might look like. But in reality, as we all know, most of you are not going to be paying cash for properties, at least not yet. So you're going to use a mortgage. You're going to use leverage. So what would it actually look like to buy a property like I just analyzed using leverage? So let me show you just kind of a summary of some numbers. Let's say that property, again, was $240,000, your purchase price. Let's say you had to pay $60,000 as a down payment. So that's the cash you came out of your pocket. And then you got a loan for $180,000. So that's the starting place. And let's just assume that the rent you have coming in, remember $1,800, just barely covers your mortgage payment on that $180,000 mortgage. Maybe it has a little bit of cash flow, and over time, maybe it gets a little bit better. But for now, there's very little cash flow in the beginning, and we just getting the property bought, and we're just barely getting the mortgage paid. That's where we are right now. But if you fast forward as a buy and hold investor in a good location, this property that's worth $240,000 today might grow over a 15-year period to, let's say, $500,000. So that's the future value that you could sell it for, or you could refinance it for. So that's one aspect of your growth or your return on this property. And then the other aspect is you pay your mortgage down. So it's $180,000 today, and you pay it down over this 15 years to, let's say, $125,000. So there's actually a spread. The difference between what the property is worth 15 years from now and what you owe 15 years from now is $375,000. So you started with a $60,000 in equity or a down payment, and that's grown to $375,000 in equity in the very end. But that's not the whole story, so I want to add up what are all of the returns that you made. Remember, we have cash flow and we have equity growth. And so the equity growth kind of came in two different chunks here. The price of the property appreciated from $240,000 to $500,000. So it appreciated by $260,000. We paid the debt down from $180 to $125. So that was a total amount of $55,000. And let's just assume that even though we didn't make much cash flow in the beginning, maybe it got a lot better over time. Like the rents went up and our mortgage payment stayed the same. So we started making more cash flow. So over time, we made $75,000 in cash flow. So I want you to look at this. When you total up all of these, 260 plus 55 plus 75, we built wealth and extra wealth, not counting taxes, which is a whole nother subject, but we built wealth of $390,000 over time. And we started with $60,000. Pretty good, right? We've multiplied our original investment many times over that 15-year period because we used leverage. That is the power of leverage. Without leverage, we made about a 10% return. With leverage, we're making many, many more times that. But if you dig into these numbers even more, and here's one of the big takeaways that I learned in my own portfolio doing these numbers on my actual properties over 2 decades, is look at what 67% of my growth, of the wealth that I built over those 15 years, came from the price growth of the property. 14% came from the debt pay down. Not bad, right? And then cash flow, the thing that we all tend to focus on a lot more, made up just under 20% of our total wealth built over those 15 years. So the lesson that I took away from this is not that cash flow is not important, not that debt pay down is not important, but when you use leverage, a lion's share, a large majority of the profits that you're going to build over time are going to come from the growth of the property. So if that is the case, then shouldn't you pay more attention to how to grow your equity and what can you do to actually improve your chances of making even larger profits from that source? So here are 4 ideas you can use to grow your equity with more confidence or to grow it even more. And the first is when you're out looking for deals, to buy low. You probably heard that old saying, buy low, sell high. Well, the cool thing about real estate, unlike stocks, which you have millions and millions of investors trying to buy the same stock, with real estate, you might be competing with 1 or 2 people, maybe nobody, to buy a property. And so this is you and the seller negotiating. And if they're motivated, they want to sell this property, it's not unreasonable that you can get a 10, 20% discount just because you're at the right place at the right time. You're willing to pay cash for the property or use very strong financing. You can buy it at a discount. So if you can do that today and buy it at a discount today, you will increase the amount of growth you have over time. But then number 2, you can also do what's called add value or force the appreciation. This is the classic fixer-upper property where you can take a property that is cosmetically really ugly and fix it up and paint it and change the flooring. But you can also do even bigger repairs like adding a wing to the property, finishing out a basement, or you can do other things other than just the repairs of the property. I've known friends who did what are called legal rehabs, where they bought properties that had legal issues or title issues, and they fixed those and they added a lot of value to the property. So there's a long list of things you can do under adding value, but that's one of the ways you make the most money in real estate. And then of course, number 3, there's passive appreciation, which I underappreciated early in my career. I kind of wrote it off as something that's not important because it's really hard to measure. It's really hard to know exactly when you have passive appreciation, but it is a background force that happens over time, especially in better locations. So the strategy here for myself is to pick locations, pick cities and regions where the population is increasing, where the economy is at least doing on average or maybe better than average. And if you do that, if you buy properties in those locations, then the background price level of the properties tends to go up over time. And this is partly because of inflation, just because the cost of rebuilding new properties goes up and everything in the economy is tending to inflate and be worth less later on. But it's also, if you choose the right local economy, you can actually do better than the background inflation by picking and choosing locations that have those qualities. And then number 4, one of my favorite but kind of boring ways to build equity is just paying your mortgage down over time. If you buy a rental property, like the example I just showed you, and your tenant pays you rent every month, and you can use that rent to pay your mortgage, every time you pay your mortgage, a piece of that mortgage is principal pay downs. So the debt balance goes down a little bit this month, a little bit more next month, a little bit over time. That starts building up and building up. And you just do that by maintaining a good rental, taking care of your tenant, and having them pay the rent every single month. We just spent a lot of time on the numbers of a good real estate deal, but I learned lesson number 4 the hard way, and it's that the numbers aren't enough. A good real estate deal has good numbers, but it also meets your buy box. Now, what is a buy box? A buy box just means you want to have a narrow definition, a focus of what a good deal is, what type of property, what location, so you can eliminate all of the other properties that don't meet your criteria. So let me give you an example of what I mean by that. There's actually 3 different levels of a buy box that I teach, and I've done videos on this. I teach this in some of my courses, but basically want to start with the big picture regional market. Think of like a metropolitan statistical area like Metro Atlanta or Metro Chicago or Metro LA. That would be like a big region. And you want to just pick a region that has good long-term potential. In many cases, this is where you already live. But if you live in a high price market, and you want to invest in a lower price market, you might go to a different market. So the point is you want to pick cities or metros where the population is increasing. That's a really important correlation. If the population is growing, good chance that your real estate will grow as as well. But you also want to look at the types of jobs, the variety of jobs, what average income levels are in your area. All those things matter to help you pick a region. And I call that a sun city because you can think about it like the solar system, and the regional market, the big city like Atlanta, Georgia, and that metro area is the economic sun. That kind of drives everything else. But then number two, as a small and mighty investor, I recommend picking a local, smaller market. You can think about this as a satellite, like a planet going around the sun. So you still get the heat and the gravity from the sun, but you want to have something that has a little bit of character and it maybe has a little bit more affordability, maybe in the suburbs, but it also has its own identity and character. I grew up in a town called Noonan, Georgia, outside of Atlanta. So that's a perfect example of a satellite city in the overall region of Atlanta. And so building a buy box is eliminating a lot of other regions, eliminating a lot of other satellite cities, and saying, here is the area where I'm going to invest, all the way down to a zip code, maybe a school district, maybe a census block if you're in a really urban area. But that specific area and being able to identify it is the key. And then within that overall market that you're investing in, you also want to identify what types of properties am I looking for? Single family houses, small multifamilies. And within those types of properties, you might even want to get to the size of the property, the materials. I like, for example, 3-bedroom, 2-bath brick properties in Clemson, South Carolina, also in a couple cities outside of Clemson that have a crawl space for easy access to the plumbing and other things they have to fix, has brick exterior because that's a low maintenance, and also like low maintenance things inside the property as well. I've had videos where I talk all about the details of what materials I like to use. So when you combine those two things, the numbers that make a good deal and the buy box that makes a good deal for you, you have clarity and focus as a real estate investor. And this is a very unusual thing in a good way, because when you have clarity and focus, it's like a superpower. You avoid all the distractions. And you can also work with your team members, like your real estate agent, your property manager, and other people who are bringing you deals to have clarity for them so that they know what to bring you. It's also going to help you with the next idea, which is the secret to finding more good real estate deals. The fifth lesson from my 22 years of real estate investing is that real estate deals don't fall on you like rain. There's this idea that, you have a buy box, you know how to run the numbers, and you can just step outside and put a bucket and a deal is just going to fall out of the sky. And there you go. The equivalent of waiting for deals to fall out of the sky is scrolling on Zillow and looking at listed properties and then saying, oh, Chad, I've looked at all the properties on Zillow in my market. There's no good deals. Your numbers don't work. The analysis strategy that you talked about doesn't work because I looked for a week on Zillow and there's no good deals. That's the equivalent of waiting for deals to fall out of the sky. There's a little bit more depth to it. There's a little bit more work that has to go into it. And there's really two habits that I found have been my critical habits that have been helpful for me when finding good deals. And the first is that you have to work on generating leads. So the idea is that you have to hustle. You have to go out there and work on getting opportunities to look at properties that may or may not work. Meaning you have to look at a lot more properties. You have to turn over a lot more stones to find the little diamonds underneath the stones. You got to keep looking. You got to hustle. There's competition. There's other people doing that. That is the grind, the daily work of real estate investing. Is generating leads. And this comes from a lot of different sources. You could, of course, look on Zillow and have a real estate agent send you listings. That 90% of properties do sell through real estate agents. So that's a very good place to start. And you should be very diligent about that. But you should also do things like driving for dollars, where you drive around your buy box and look at different properties and identify properties that aren't on the market. Send letters to them, reach out to homeowners, or start talking to wholesalers or other people who are turnkey providers who are finding deals or building deals off market that you can then develop a relationship with to bring you referrals. All of these is kind of like fishing. If you were going to try to catch fish and you wanted to eat fish dinner for tonight, if you just put one fishing line in the water, the chances of you catching a fish are not as good. You need to put 3, 4, 5, 6 fishing lines in the water if you actually want to eat dinner, if you want to have a good real estate deal. That's essentially what generating leads is all about. But then the second habit is, even if you're generating leads, I would say the number one challenge, the problem when I'm coaching people about finding good deals, the thing they're not doing well enough is making enough offers. Like the conversation usually goes like this. They've started looking on Zillow. Maybe they've done a couple other things to generate leads, but then they say, well, I've worked on it for 2 months and I'm not finding any good deals. I just don't think there's any good deals in my market. My question always is, well, how many offers have you made? And the answer is always something like, well, 2. 3 offers maybe? And my answer is not enough. You're not making enough offers. You got to make offers consistently. If you don't ask for something, there's no way you can get it. So just waiting for somebody else to come down to a price that you like isn't always going to work. You have to actually ask for the price. And sometimes that means an uncomfortable offer, something less than what somebody else has the property listed for. Or maybe it's a creative offer where you're offering different kind of terms or different kind of financing that would make the deal feasible for you. But the point is you have to make a lot of offers and you have to get in the habit of doing that. And really have to think about the big picture of deal finding as a numbers game. It's kind of like a funnel where the opportunities, the leads are at the top of the funnel. And these numbers I have on the screen are a rough approximation of the way things really work. You might have to generate 100 leads or opportunities to look at, to evaluate a little bit in order to go out and look at 30 properties that you actually inspect or have your real estate agent inspect for you in order to make 20 offers to get one deal. Now that number seems a little shocking, like, wow, I've got to make 20 offers potentially in order to get a good deal. That discomfort is good because you have to have more volume. You have to look at more opportunities in order to get the good deals. The professional real estate investors, the people who are buying lots and lots and lots of properties, they're looking at thousands of leads per month in order to get 4, 5, 6 good deals that they're buying in 1 month. So if you and I are small and mighty investors trying to get 1, 2, 3 good deals per year, we have to do the same thing. We can spread it out a little bit, but the numbers are the same. We have to increase the volume at the top of the funnel in order to be able to buy more deals at the bottom of the funnel. My 6th lesson from 22 years as a real estate investor is one you might not hear a lot of landlords say, but I believe it wholeheartedly, and it's that tenants are your all-stars. So you have a lot of team members as a rental investor. You have attorneys and CPAs, you have a property manager perhaps, you have a real estate agent, you have contractors. All of them are very important. But I make the argument that your tenant is really at the center of all of that. They're your customer. If they don't pay their rent on time, if they don't enjoy living there, if they move out every year or two and cost you a lot of money every time it turns over, if any of those things happen, your real estate business doesn't function. Everything else flows from having a good tenant in the property. So they are your all-star. Because of that fact, there's a couple more lessons that I take from that. The first one is sort of obvious. If they are your all-star, then you have to treat them that way. But it actually starts before you even meet the tenant with the choice of the property you pick. So all the way back to the buy box lesson we talked about, that's one reason that's so important. Picking properties in the right location that are in demand, that other people want to live in, and then fixing it up and treating it well and maintaining it well over time. Actually do the fix-up work, do the maintenance work that you're expected as a landlord. That is what treating them like an all-star is. And I found it so surprising that many landlords I've talked to who complain about their tenants not paying on time or they have a hard time finding good tenants, if I were to look at their property, they're pretty much treating it like a slumlord. They're earning the respect or the lack of respect that they have by not treating the property well. So treat the property well and fix it up, maintain it, and buy properties in better locations, and you'll actually attract even better tenants. And then I also like just a little strategy with me is if you can be slightly below the full market value of the rent. There's always a range. Like I have some houses right now that the top of the rent could probably be like $2,000 or $2,100, and the bottom of the range could be $1,850. So there's kind of a range there. I like to be on the bottom part of that range, not because I wouldn't like to make more rent. If you're on the bottom of that range, it's actually a good deal for the tenant, and they tend to turn over less because the competition that they would move to would be even more. So you do want to charge what the property's worth, but being on the lower end of that can be a benefit to your tenant and also to you for reducing turnover. But the other lesson that comes from this, if tenants are your all-stars, then actually pick all-stars for the role that they play. I look at this a lot like hiring somebody for a job position. If you had a business and you were going to hire somebody to be your salesperson or to be your administrator or to be your financial director for your business, you'd be really careful about hiring that person. Another metaphor is when you go get a loan at the bank, have you ever noticed how careful they are and how much time they take before they give you the money, before they loan you the money? Well, it's the same thing with a property. You're basically loaning the property to somebody else. And so you want to screen very carefully. Don't be afraid to take your time. You should have written criteria, which I've talked about a lot on my channel, about having those written criteria that are legal, of course. They have business purposes behind all the criteria you use. And if you treat your property well, if you buy in good locations, if you're fair with the rates that you charge, then you should be able to be picky with the tenants that you put into the property. Don't just put anybody who has a security deposit, who's ready to move in. The more urgent they are and the more quickly they want to move in, that's a red flag. That means you need to be even more patient and do a little bit more background check on who they are. Have they paid on time? Have they paid all their other bills on time before they're allowed to rent your property? My 7th big lesson is that bookkeeping is a superpower. Yep, you heard me right. After 22 years of investing, I've learned from running the numbers with a lot of other investors that a lot of investors don't know their numbers. They're not keeping good books. They don't know what's actually going on. It reminds me of one of my favorite movies, The Matrix, with Neo, who, if you don't know that storyline, there's a world that the machines have taken over, AI has taken over, and humans are basically batteries that live plugged in to the Matrix to kind of keep them content and happy. And most humans don't know what's going on. Neo, the superhero, actually learns what's going on with a few other people. And he gets to the point where, as a superhero, he can see the entire world in zeros and ones and little bits of information. And I look at bookkeeping a lot like that if you can learn to see your entire business, your entire world as a set of numbers, you can start recognizing problems just by looking at the numbers, looking at reports. But it requires some discipline. And sometimes it requires some not so fun, kind of tedious type work. So the type of bookkeeping I'm talking about, this could be a much bigger subject, but just some basic good bookkeeping has these 4 elements, at least for me. Number 1, you got to have separate accounts. So even though you're a small and mighty investor, you can't have your real estate investing business be mingled with your personal accounts. So don't run your rental business out of your personal bank accounts. Get a separate bank account, or maybe bank accounts if you have multiple properties. That's an easy way to kind of keep multiple properties separate. Also have a separate credit card. That way, all the transactions, all the financial information that comes in from your business is totally separate. It's on its own bank statement, its own credit card statement. That just makes everything else that we're going to talk about much easier. Number 2, have some kind of software. It's so easy with software these days. There's free software you could use, like Google Sheets. For my one self-managed property that my wife and I take care of ourselves, I just use Google Sheets to handle all the transactions every year. It just keeps it pretty simple. But for my bigger real estate investing business, we use QuickBooks. And we actually have a bookkeeper these days who helps us do that. But I have done all the bookkeeping myself for many years as well, so I understand how to do that. There's also other good software out there. There's probably lots of others, but I've heard some of my students using Stessa, which has a free option, REI Club, which is either a low paid option or maybe a free option as well. There's others out there, but they're software that are custom tailored either towards bookkeeping or towards real estate investor bookkeeping that you could basically use to track and label all of your transactions. So your bank accounts are where the transactions happen, and then the software tracks, and then you have to label it. You have to clean it up here and there. But then also you have to have a parallel system of digital records. So if you have a receipt, an invoice, some kind of paperwork, like when you buy a property or sell a property, there's a settlement statement. You have all those numbers in your software, but you have to actually have a record of that. And these days, it's pretty easy to scan that in and just track it somewhere like Google Drive or Dropbox, iCloud, OneDrive. It doesn't matter which one you use. Just have something on the cloud, probably have a backup somewhere else in your house too, so that you can have records to prove all the transactions you have in your software. And then finally, because you've done all that, because you've done those little detailed work, you can then run reports. And I like to do a monthly, called a KPI, a key performance indicator reports. These are just every month. What's our rent look like? How much rent do we collect compared to what we thought we were going to collect? What our expenses look like this month from just a rough total number, not per property, but is looking at it on the total. And then how much cash flow do we make this month and then year to date? Those are kind of the key things I like to look at, kind of like taking the pulse of a patient. If you're a nurse or a doctor, that's how I take a pulse on my business every single month. And then I look more in depth with a lot more reports on a yearly basis. Of course, you have to do your taxes as well, but this is more than doing your taxes. This is about you having the superpower of understanding your business so that you can make better decisions on a month-to-month basis, so you can make better investment decisions, so you can evaluate the past purchases you made, and so that you can project out on future purchases you make to make even better investment decisions. The 8th lesson from my 22 years as a real estate investor is maybe the simplest lesson, but it's also probably the hardest. And the lesson is simply to be patient, to hold on. And I think about this using a gardening metaphor, a fruit tree metaphor. Every rental property to me is a lot like planting a seed. And if you were a gardener expecting to plant a seed and eventually grow an orange tree so that you could eat oranges off the tree, that's the equivalent of us being able to use rental income to pay for our expenses, to give us financial freedom. If we were gardening, we wouldn't expect that little seedling to become a full fruit tree in 6 months, in a year, and even in 2 or 3 years. We would have patience. We would know that there's a natural process it has to go through. The seedling has to grow out of the earth. You have to nurture it. You have to water it. You have to fertilize it. You have to give it sunlight. You have to take care of it. But there's a natural process and a timeline that it takes. And real estate investing is very similar. You can't rush that process. One of my mentors wrote a book called Building Wealth, One House at a Time. Just planting a seed, nurturing it, planting a seed, nurturing it, and then letting the process of the economy, of the ups and downs, do its thing. But if you get impatient, if you jerk up the plant by the seeds in a year or two because it didn't produce oranges, then you're going to sacrifice all of the results that you're going to get later on. So this really is a long game. The best investors in the world, Warren Buffett, people like that, they have a very long-term horizon. And it takes a psychological game you have to play with yourself in order to create that patience, in order to not be doing things that are going to sacrifice the long-run results that you want, and just stick with it. The ninth lesson that I've learned, or that I'm continuing to learn, if I'm honest with myself, is the lesson of enough. So there's this point you get to in your wealth building journey, which I mentioned earlier, those phases of real estate investing where you move from the builder to the harvester, where you're always focusing on growing, and you're on that treadmill of return on investment and buying more properties, to where you actually switch to a different game, where you start playing a different game, where you're actually harvesting your wealth, where you're reducing your risk, where you're increasing your cash flow, and actually trying to live off the fruits of what you've been building. And I want to tell a football story to kind of make this lesson come home a little bit, because I'm a football player myself. You see on the right there, that was back in the day, 23 years ago, I guess, or 24 years ago, when I was in college playing football, middle linebacker for Clemson University. And in football, there's this time of the game where if you're winning the game, let's say you're winning by 3 touchdowns and it's in the fourth quarter and you still have, some time left to go in the game, but you're winning big. And the coaches start to realize we can't take the same risk that we did in the first quarter. Like, we have a big lead. Now, that doesn't mean we just quit on the game and we don't play the game anymore, but we do some things that are a little bit more conservative. For example, we don't run out of bounds and stop the clock, and we run the ball more, which is, it takes up more clock. So a lot of these things are using up the clock and also reducing risk. When you throw the ball downfield in football, you have the risk that other team's going to intercept it. So there's a risk reward that you always play in football and that you also play in real estate investing. But as you've won the game, you start taking less risk. There's this quote I love by Warren Buffett where he says, "It's insane to risk something you already have and that you need for something you don't have and you don't need." And that's this idea of continuing to move the goalpost, or staying on the treadmill of getting more and more and more, and never saying, you know what, I think I've got enough now to start transitioning to a different game. That could be, it's insanity, is what Warren Buffett says. And you're also risking everything you've built. So I like this idea, and it's not always easy to do, but to take some chips off the table, to use a poker metaphor. In football, you would change your game plan. You would change your approach. Well, in real estate investing, we also change our game plan. We have a little different set of rules. And the playbook that you're playing at this stage is the harvester playbook instead of the builder playbook. So it might not be that you're always trying to maximize return on investment as a harvester. You might be maximizing those other things we talked about, cash flow. You might pay off debt, for example. At least that's something I have done, not because that is the best growth idea to do. It's not the best growth idea. You're paying off 5% debt or 6% debt when you can make a 10 or 15% return or more by investing it in another property and using leverage. But that's not your point. A builder focuses on return on investment. A harvester focuses on cash flow, focuses on reducing risk. So by paying off debt, you are reducing the risk that if you have a big recession or a depression, that you don't lose the property to the bank. So you're reducing that risk. And I like to sort of balance this, because a lot of people who are type A's, who are able to build enough wealth to get there in the first place, have a hard time getting off the treadmill fully. So I like to sort of hedge my bets a little bit by building what's called an income floor. So this is another big idea, if I could write here, income floor. And this basically means you take a portion of your portfolio that you treat it like the harvester, and you have a playbook where you try to build enough free and clear properties or low risk properties that you can use those to pay for your essential expenses. I have a guy who I've gotten to know remotely named Mike Cantu out in California. And at one point, he's been flipping houses and doing real estate for over 30 or 40 years, I think. And at one point, though, he got a big windfall from selling some stuff, and he just paid off a group of his best properties. In each property, he sort of assigned a job description. This property is going to pay for my insurance. This property is going to pay for my groceries. This property is going to pay for my travel. And they were assigned to a purpose in his life, because he was in a harvester phase and he wanted to build an income floor that would guarantee him as much as he could to have that income for the rest of his life. Now, he still had another part of his portfolio where he's flipping houses and being aggressive. So if you want, it's not like you're quitting the game forever, but having the peace of mind of knowing, hey, I've reached enough. I'm not just going to keep on going on the treadmill forevermore. I'm going to change my game plan a little bit, is a super wise move as a real estate investor that can help you sleep well at night while still allowing you to have some fun and stay in the game. Lesson number 10 is one that I just stole verbatim from a mentor of mine named John Schaub. He wrote a book called Building Wealth, One House at a Time, one of my favorite real estate books. I have several versions on my shelf. And when I first met John, it was at a seminar. And of course, I'm a book nerd. I brought the book with me so he could sign it. And after we talked a little bit, he signed it. And I looked at what he wrote in my book, and he wrote this. He wrote, build wealth, enjoy it, share it. We've talked a lot about building wealth. There are a ton of tactics. There are a ton of strategies. I hope you've taken some ideas that are very helpful to you. You can apply right away. But I think these lessons of enjoy it and share it spoke to me. Maybe it's just me, but I had a hard time sometimes getting off that treadmill and just enjoying the time that you have while you're in your 20s, while you're in your 30s, while you're in 40s and 50s or 60s, not waiting until the end of your life to someday enjoy the fruits of my labor and always deferring my happiness until the rest of my life. Like finding ways to enjoy those fruits along the way. I think that's really important. John is a pilot. He likes to fly. He likes to go fishing. He likes to spend time with his family. I like to travel. I like to, my wife and I have taken our kids and lived abroad at different times. We lived in South America for a year and a half in Ecuador, just with our kids and let them go to school. My wife's a Spanish teacher and languages are a big thing for us. So that was a big deal. We've lived in Spain. So for us, it's travel, spending time and money and enjoying that along the way and not waiting. Whatever it is for you, I bet there's things that you have on your list, maybe that you've put off and said, hey, that's not something I can do at this point. But if you can start doing a little bit of that now, to remember why you're investing in real estate in the first place, why you're building wealth, it could be kind of give you the motivation and the energy you need. And then finally, sharing it. Not just taking this money and using it for yourself, although that's cool. Like go to the beach, enjoy it. You probably need a little bit of reward for all the work you've been putting it in. But we all know that this thing goes full circle. And that both the money and the time that you generate from this financial freedom that you have is the most enjoyment you get from it is sharing it with other people, whether that's the people close to you, your family, or just other causes in your community. Something that's really important to me in my local community has been a frustration that we try to walk and bike around in town and we can't find ways to, the pathways, the sidewalks, the bike paths were non-existent or really unsafe. So about 10 years ago, we started volunteering and trying to change that. And so we and some other volunteers formed something called the Green Crescent Trail. Is still ongoing. It's taking forever, but it's a very meaningful project to me and my wife. And it's something we don't make any money from. It's a nonprofit. We invest money. We put money into the nonprofit. We ask other people to put money. We've raised millions of dollars with other people, built several miles of trail. We have another 3 or 4 miles that we hope are going to happen. That's just one example. Maybe that doesn't matter to you, but what matters to me is spending my time with that, spending my time with my family. And that's really the slogan of my entire channel is do what matters, is that real estate investing, money, building wealth, those are just tools. And the thing that we're using those tools to build is a life that matters, is us spending our time, enjoying it, sharing it, doing what matters. And so that's my encouragement to you in this lesson. And then I encourage myself, and that I'm always trying to learn as well, is that prioritize the things that matter to you. Use wealth and real estate investing to serve those things and not let those things that are just the tools lose their place in the pecking order. So I'm very curious to hear from you in the comments about which one of these lessons resonated the most with you. But there's one specific lesson I covered about the buy box that I think every real estate investor should learn more about. And so my next video is a deep dive on my own personal investing criteria, what I look for in the ideal rental property at my local buy box. So if you're watching on YouTube, just click on the thumbnail above me here, or you can look at the link in the podcast or the YouTube description below. Thanks for watching or listening. I'll see you in the next episode.